Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by again today. I have exciting news. Today I'm speaking with NDP candidate Matthew Green. He's running in Hamilton Center, and he's speaking with us today about his vision, what he's hearing about from his constituents, and we're really glad to have him here. Matthew, thanks for joining.
So happy to be here. What's up to BreadTube, LeftTube? Crystal, you're doing great work by popularizing big ideas, and so I'm honored to join you here today.
Well, and thank you for coming. So just to start it off, for those who don't know, Matthew is an institution in Hamilton. He's been a city councilor there, a noted progressive at the municipal scene. So I guess my first question is, why federal politics now, and why specifically the NDP right now?
Sure. I mean, the things that drew me to municipal politics was just how fast it moves and how direct it is at the neighborhood level. And, as a community guy, I was in the basements and in the community centers doing this work long before I ran municipally. I saw issues that were unfolding in my neighborhoods. And I thought I believed in a neighborhood response to that, kind of an asset-based community development approach. And what I recognized quite quickly as a municipal councilor is that I could do casework. I could do really good casework with constituents facing homelessness, precarity of jobs, facing, serious public health issues. But I would be just treating the symptoms and not the root causes of the inequality in my city. And as you know, we've had a stalwart for 30 years in David Christopherson.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible legacy. When he was mulling about the idea of retirement, he had the courtesy to reach out to me. We had some ongoing discussions about it. It was important for me not to run municipally, only to leave a few months or a year later and kind of take up two spaces.
Yeah.
And so I was really keen on having this opportunity and this lead up. And, to be honest with you, I'll be very, very upfront. I'm a very new Democrat, Crystal.
Yeah.
I come to the party honestly. I did a lot of, soul searching and observations. And what I observed as a city councilor is that, at the provincial level, this deputy leader in Jagmeet Singh was speaking to some of the inequalities and injustices that I had experienced as a racialized person, particularly around street checks and carding. And it's not a popular issue. Like, it is not politically savvy to take on the police, but it's the right thing to do when there's these obvious gaps in equality in the way that the law is being distributed throughout communities. So when he came out and spoke against that practice of racial profiling and street checks and had that initial courage, I observed that in him. I respected that deeply in him.
Once Jagmeet put his name forward and made the intention to run federally, I felt compelled. I actually felt compelled and inspired to use everything that we had learned here in Hamilton in terms of the organizing efforts to bring new people into the party, which I think is proof of the approach that he took, and not just looking inside existing members and trying to vie for the super delegates and the super influencers inside the party, but to actually go out and talk to everyday people and invite them into the party. And I think you saw that with his incredible first round win at the leadership convention, where he had really proven that his path to become the leader is really the only path forward for the NDP, and to go out and to bring new Canadians into the party.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I think that, the NDP has long taken positions that have been politically unpopular. And I think that it's one of the hallmarks of the party is we've taken positions in the past that have been less than popular, but that with time become common sense. And I think that we're going to look back at, many of the day-to-day realities of racial injustice in this country, like carding, street checks and things like that. And we're going to be quite ashamed of them. And I think Jagmeet and people like yourself and other activists within the party and non-party activists as well have taken a really strong lead there. So based on that, I'm wondering, what do you like? You've been talking with Hamiltonians for a while now, because obviously through your role as city councilor, but now you've been canvassing, in an effort to represent them as their federal MP. What are the issues that are driving Hamiltonians right now politically? You go to the door, you see them at the mall, you see them at the, on Main Street. What are they talking about?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, Hamilton is a bellwether, an economic bellwether for the rest of the country. We watched in the 80s and 90s as free trade and neoliberalism really put the pressure on our manufacturing and our steel industry here in the north. You'll know that Hamilton is to the country the heart of our industrial sector. Everything that gets built starts in Hamilton with the steel, right? And so we watched that happen with Dofasco and US Steel, where we once employed tens of thousands of people through the process of free trade and automation. We've watched that shrink and shrink and shrink. And so that was the first step. And we're a very resilient city. Yeah. But I can tell you in this most recent round, particularly as it related to steel tariffs, as it's related to the bankruptcy of UF Steel, where workers had put their benefits and pensions in consideration for wages for decades, hoping for a better retirement, only to have them stolen through the CCAA bankruptcy process. The uncertainty of having an agreement with your employer in a contract that you might not be able to retire at 65, that quite frankly is criminal. And then you look at Hamilton Specialty Bar, where we can watch CNN and see a guy like Mitt Romney and know that he has this company called Bain Capital, but not necessarily have a local application for it. And here in Hamilton, we have this situation where Bain Capital essentially bankrupted Hamilton Specialty Bar, which was a 125-year steel company, 4 generations, 250 plus workers, 200 plus pensioners more, just evaporate, literally being demolished and scrapped as we speak. And there's a profound injustice in the way that this economic system is treating workers. Yeah. And so what I'm hearing at the doors, and I think what we're going to see as a ripple effect across the country, is that these free trade deals aren't actually free. They come at a huge cost, and it's a cost to workers. It's this idea that the market is somehow going to settle for everyday working class people is absurd. And this idea that liberalism, a recent article came out where the Liberal Party has quoted that middle class families are $210,000 a household. Yeah, Christo, that is absurd. If you come to Hamilton and try to argue that middle class families are making over $200,000, like having 2 people with 6-figure incomes, is absurd. And quite frankly, it's insulting. Yeah. And what I'm hearing on the doors, is anger. People feel like they've been lied to. They feel like they've been cheated. And you know what? They're right. They are absolutely right. So both of those, instances here in Hamilton happened right in my ward. So I would be getting the calls from people who've worked 30 years trying to figure out whether or not they're going to have to split their pills for their prescriptions, or whether or not they're going to be able to pay their mortgage, maybe, sell their house and downsize. And that is irresponsible. That is an economy that is irresponsible to the people, nor is it democratic. So for me, having conversations about what a more compelling vision for the future of Canada looks like must be based on a democratic economy. Not this capitulation to the rich, the wealthy corporations, which is what we've seen out of both the Conservatives and the Liberal parties for decades, for time immemorial, since the beginning of Canada, really. Yeah.
No, I mean, you're 100% right. And I think just a quick shout out to Scott Duvall, who's a Hamilton MP. Hopefully Matthew will be his colleague come the fall. And Scott Duvall has sort of made it his personal crusade. He's a steel worker himself, to protect pensioners, to basically say that CEOs won't be able to pay out golden parachute bonuses like they did at Sears and Stelco, unless pensions are taken care of. That pensioners need to be seen as a priority. And both Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer are opposed to that because they value above all, quote unquote, investor confidence. You know what I mean? And I think that it's crucial to note that the NDP is offering a different vision. And I think it's crucial that people know this, as you noted, it should be seen as criminal because pensions are deferred wages.
Absolutely.
They're not a perk benefit.
That's
they're
right.
they're not like the Christmas party that you get. These are deferred wages. Workers took less pay on their weekly or monthly paychecks to get a retirement, and now that's being stolen from them. It's like stealing money from someone's paycheck, just doing it at the end of their career. And I think it needs to stop. So kind of
absolutely. And on this idea of investor confidence, yes, investors are confident that they can come into this country and screw workers for their benefits and pensions. And Scott Duvall, I have to say, has been magnificent on this file because as a colleague for me at City Council, he was a councillor with me for 2 years. I watched him fight it there when we had our Steel Caucus. I listened to the Liberals in the last federal election, make huge promises that they were going to unveil CCAA and expose, you know what, and I'm not trying to be, it's not trying to use hyperbole here, but it feels treasonous. It feels treasonous when we make these pacts with these multinational corporations to come in and to be able to buy our steel industry out with the understanding, and sometimes a huge tax breaks. Let's not even begin to have that conversation. And then only to have them turn around and bankrupt people and put the workers on the bankruptcy list instead of on the creditors list where they deserve.
Yeah.
You got me fired up, Crystal. Man.
No, you're right. I mean, that's like, and yeah, and you know, the Liberal MPs in Hamilton have been, in that area, have been so duplicitous on this file, you know, Robertina and Philomene and Tassi, you know, yeah, it's a sordid affair. And, you know, Trudeau will say with SNC that he's doing it to protect jobs and pensions. But we know that that's not true, because if he cared about jobs and pensions, there'd be a heck of a lot more being done in Hamilton and in Oshawa and in Thunder Bay and in you know, communities wherever Sears were, which is in hundreds of communities, dozens of communities across Canada. Going off that point, I'd love to know, you know, the NDP platform is really bold this time around. I think it's one of the boldest platforms the party has had since the 1980s at least. So I want to know, reading that platform over, is there a policy piece in that really speaks to you, or there are a couple, and why?
Sure. I mean, as a city councillor, one of the things I'm most proud of is I came in and introduced the Blue Dot motion, which was this pie in the sky idea that everybody should have the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. And you'll recall the conversations with the LEAP manifesto in the last cycle, which appeared to be highly contentious. And so one of the things I'm most proud about is our version of a Green New Deal. We are the only party that is fighting for and defending our ecology while ensuring that no workers get left behind. Yeah. A just transition for workers is the key distinction between us in the Green Party's empty promises and, quite frankly, this Liberal idea that they can tax and buy their way out of climate change. Unless there is a radical shift away from this extractionary, vulturistic capitalism, we will never, ever be able to adequately fend off climate change, catastrophic climate change. So this idea of having 300,000 climate jobs, things like free transit, understanding that if we want to transition away from a carbon economy, we have to provide compelling alternatives. Free transit is a compelling alternative. So looking at not just in cities, but between cities and between provinces. That is profound. In Ontario, we faced the privatization of the distribution of hydro. So for us to be able to look at climate jobs as HVAC, you know, people who could retrofit buildings to ensure that the energy costs are low and the carbon footprint on heating and energy costs in a home are lessened. So these are ethical questions, they're ecological questions, they're certainly economic justice questions. But for me, when I'm talking to people on the doors, climate change, you know, must be the number one question in this election. Will it be? I'm unclear, because the way the Conservatives and the Liberals are framing it is it's about, you know, carbon tax or no carbon tax. And that wholly misses the point. Yeah. The point is that right now we have the Amazon is burning, you know, like we have pipeline spills, we have, you know, attacks on Indigenous sovereignty, and there's no party who's really putting forward a comprehensive plan outside of the NDP. And we're doing it unapologetically. We are saying that polluters must pay. So, Crystal, imagine in a democratic economy where you know, a major oil company comes into our territory and extracts for decades out of the oil sands and out of these fields, and then they walk. They privatize all the profit and they socialize all the risk. We're saying that needs to end. We're saying that polluters must pay. So you can imagine in Alberta, for instance, if we force them to pay, those workers who work on those pipelines would have 100 years of work and remediation and cleaning up the disaster that is those oil fields, that are those oil fields. There's no ethical oil. You know, like the idea of the Green Party suggesting that they're going to fight climate change by building a refinery is absurd. Yeah. It's absurd. And I think the electorate is smarter than that. There are a lot of environmentalists who are holding on to hope. But, you know, I think that at the end of the day, the cat's out of the bag already, and people know that the Green Party doesn't have a compelling alternative, that they're going to continue with more neoliberalism and they're going to continue, you know, with more capitalist answers to climate change, and it's just not going to work.
No, certainly. And I mean, you could talk about a few things there. I mean, one key aspect is that, and I think we can be clear that no settler party, I think, has the full answer to reconciliation. I think that, there are some fundamental questions that are going to go beyond even the NDP platform on that. But I think the NDP is the only party really dialoguing with how a Green New Deal relates to reconciliation. And I know the Liberals have, built pipelines without the consent of communities. And I know the Green Party's whole position on Indigenous people is largely ignorant at best. And I do think it's important to note that Jagmeet Singh and the party have done at least something of a good job at intertwining this fight for a Green New Deal with meaningful reconciliation and partnership with Indigenous people. And I think that's very important to note.
Yeah, I mean, the whole notion of a nation to nation, nation to multiple nations, understanding that we will not be able to lead that process, that these communities will be leading these discussions in ways that are relevant to them where they are, right? And so, for me, the baseline understanding of the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People is an agreement that has to go beyond talk, and the Liberal Party has been talking about that for a very long time, but certainly not delivering. When they buy a pipeline, not just supporting pipelines, but when they, and almost in essence, nationalize the pipeline by taking our tax dollars and purchasing it for, multi-billionaire companies is ridiculous. And the fact that there's still, the Attawapiskat situations, the Grassy Narrows situations that are happening here, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of reconciliation. It might have felt good for Canadians during our 150 to wrap our arms around that notion and maple wash it in this way. But the reality is the Liberal government has not delivered, and they have betrayed their treaties to Indigenous peoples across these lands.
Yeah, I mean, I think 3 words sum it up, and it's thanks, or 4 words, thanks for your donation, right?
Oh God, it's atrocious.
That's Justin Trudeau's, that's his reconciliation at core. So just one final question, and this relates to, you've been talking, and we've talked about it in this interview, but you've been spending some time on social media talking about how we need to have more economic democracy, and that means more, strong unions, and strong worker control, but it also does mean some public ownership. And you had this really great infographic that talked about all the ways, all the sorts of industries and companies that have been privatized. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Can you talk a little bit more about that policy, what you envision the role of public ownership being in building a Green New Deal and building a just society, and on and on?
Absolutely. As a municipal councillor, one of the things I became very interested in is this idea of a new urban agenda. We know it to be true that climate change, war, and urbanization are the 3 key factors. And so looking at how we build our cities and urban centers, the question of privatization constantly is at the table, because at the end of the day, municipalities are not equipped to be able to provide the services for the public that they require based on the way that we're funded. So what does that look like for us? Well, that looks like real brass tacks on these deals. So things like water, things like transit, the day-to-day services, the very purpose of government has been commodified. And we're finding that this faux crisis, this faux economic crisis that has demanded 2 and 3 decades of austerity is really a ploy to take public funded assets and sell them to the rich and the powerful.
Yeah.
I could tell you, we knew that the Liberal government was going to fall in Ontario probably a year. As soon as the hydro issue came up, we knew that election for Kathleen winning the Ontario Liberals was a done deal.
Yeah.
It's a done deal. So for the New Democratic Party, the understanding that we need to decommodify the housing market by providing 500,000 units online for affordability. For me personally, the understanding that the key essentials of life need to be decommodified. They ought not be run for profit's sake, that we can build a different alternative economy that is democratic. And what I mean by that is that every austerity budget is a redistribution of wealth from the working class to the wealthy.
Yeah.
And to turn that tap, to redistribute that in a more equitable way, means that things like transit, housing, food, water, yes, like electric, renewable energy, but also whatever fossil fuels that we have. You look to places like Norway, which have always been nationalized with sovereign funds for their oil.
Yeah.
And they're now able to shift away from a carbon economy because they've diversified it enough and built coffers that are great enough where they can do other things. Had Alberta done that, we would be in a much different situation. Had Canada had done that, would have been in a much different situation. So to talk about shifting from a carbon economy without completely redesigning how we move things around and people around needs to begin with the idea of publicly owned assets. And I can say that when CUPW came out with delivering community power, which then, became like this LEAP supported movement with Abby Lewis and Naomi and dozens of grassroots organizers across the country, people scoffed. On the left, they scoffed. They're like, you can't do this. It's not possible.
Yeah.
But not only can we do it, we must do it. Yeah. Because if we don't, we already know what the consequences are. So that means that we need to look at nationalizing essential services and decommodifying our existence here. That's fundamentally what this means. That affordability for people, pharmacare, complete Medicare, which includes, mental health and teeth and eyes and ears, is, I think, the manifestation of a just society. And that's what we're hearing at the doors in so many different ways. People that feel left out. And what we're trying to do as a new Democratic Party is bring them back in, connect them to the process of government, and help people recognize that government is for them and they are the government.
Yeah, no, I mean, I fully agree. I think that, this idea that, we decommodify things to build that gradual approach to socialism, I think is important. Ed Broadbent, in some of my historical research, he said that once, where he says, the goal should be to take things out of the market that shouldn't be in the market. And that's things like education and basic shelter, the basic utilities that, that exist. It doesn't necessarily mean that, small businesses need to disappear, but it does mean that in the Labor Party's terms, the commanding heights of the economy need to largely be controlled through a combination of worker and cooperative and public ownership. And I think that's the path we have to strive for. And it won't happen all at once, but I do think that what you're doing in Hamilton and what you've been doing in social media and what the NDP platform is doing on healthcare alone and on the Green New Deal is moving us in the right direction. And even we could say Andrea Horwath's plan in Ontario, which had many of the same goals, but then also talked about, ending the process of contracting out was just
that's right.
Right? And it's about reversing this neoliberal tide that we haven't done, because for so long the left played defense. It was never about let's add dental care. It was always about let's save the existing healthcare, or it's not let's build public housing. It's let's save the existing housing stock we have. And I think it's good that we're going on the offense now, and that can only mean good things. And whether it's here in Canada or whether it's in Britain or whether it's in the United States, Bernie and Corbyn and Jagmeet are all going on the offense, and I think that's great to see.
You know what? At the end of the day, look, if there's one thing that we can learn, and we really should be paying close attention to right-wing populism, is that we can be radical in our approach. Yeah. That we can offer a radical alternative to the way things are, because the way things aren't working for everyday people in this country. And the implications is that if we don't fill that void, the far right will. And so that's our challenge. That's why we're out going door to door, street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood. We're doing the cookouts. We're having fun, Crystal. Like, politics does not have to be stuffy. We're out here, we're having a great time. And, the work that you're doing is so critically important, because it's true. We are never going to get mainstream media support until we kind of own the grassroots social media efforts, right? Like, the tail can wag the dog, but for us to hold our breath and wait for favorable coverage in the corporate hedge fund American owned mainstream media in Canada is ridiculous. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
And thanks again. Thanks again for coming. For those who don't know, let people know where they can find you on social media.
Absolutely, my guy. So Matthew Green, NDP. That's Twitter. That's Instagram. I would love for you to check us out at MatthewGreen2019.ca. And you know what solidarity looks like across this country. Let's amplify these great ideas. Let's amplify the work that's happening with incredible candidates. That's another thing I should say, Crystal. Yeah. This crop of candidates is exemplary.
Yeah.
I am so proud to go to the doors knowing the types of people, the quality and integrity of the candidates that I share this party with. Shout out to everybody out there who's trying to build a more just and fair Canada.
Yeah, I
for
mean,
the
these
for the
candidates,
NDP.
though, are fantastic. You're 100% right. And I think one of my goals on this channel is to interview some of these fantastic candidates. Honestly, the depth of experience and the diversity of viewpoints is just fantastic. Matthew is, I think, one of the best, but he's just the tip of the iceberg. And
Yeah,
I
man,
think that, there's going to be a lot. I think once people start to meet their local NDP candidates and see how the party is recruiting Indigenous people like never before and is recruiting young people like never before, I think people are going to be very surprised by the potency of Jagmeet's team, and a lot of people who are counting him out, I think, are going to be very surprised come September and October. So Matthew,
absolutely.
Thanks again for joining.
Absolute pleasure, Christo. Thank you so much, and send out solidarity to everybody out there putting the work in.
Thanks again.